Deadly storm. Hurricane Dorian parks over the Bahamas. We have a report as it slowly moves closer to the United States mainland. West Texas rampage. A gunman kills at least 7 people and injures around 24 others. We have the latest on another mass shooting as calls are renewed for congressional action. Creating Cardinals. Pope Francis names 13 new church leaders from around the world. We have a report from Rome. And prayers in Peru. The faithful gathered to pay homage to St. Rose of Lima. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, September 3rd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby. Hurricane Dorian leaves at least 5 people dead after hitting the Bahamas for the last 2 days. Now Americans living along the Atlantic coast brace for the Category 2 storm. President Donald Trump calls on people to be prepared. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Wyatt, over 2 million people in Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina have been warned to evacuate for fear Dorian could bring life-threatening storm surge flooding, even as far north as North Carolina.
We expect that much of the eastern seaboard will be ultimately impacted, and some of it very, very severely.
President Trump sends a warning from Washington. Hurricane Dorian is life-threatening. Emergency officials in Jacksonville, Florida, asked people in low-lying areas near the coast to evacuate.
If you live in one of these areas, there may be a point in time during this storm where if you call 911, they won't be able to get to you. You'll be on your own.
There are warnings to stay off the beach due to life-threatening waves and surf conditions. Evacuation orders extend into South Carolina.
We are looking also for, again, tropical storm force winds and surge, so we could be facing still a very, very damaging event tomorrow night into Thursday.
In Wilmington, North Carolina, Hurricane Dorian brings back memories of last year's catastrophe.
We're less than a year away from Hurricane Florence, and we're standing here on the precipice of another great storm coming into our community.
Dorian is now considered a Category 2 storm, still very dangerous with 110-mile-per-hour winds. Before, it was deemed even more powerful as a Category 5 hurricane. A storm of that magnitude seemed to baffle the president.
I'm not sure that I've ever even heard of a Category 5. I knew it existed, and I've seen some Category 4s. You don't even see them that much, but a Category 5 is something that I don't know that I've ever even heard the term. Other than I know it's there. That's the ultimate, and that's what we have, unfortunately.
Though many states could be impacted by this storm, President Trump received criticism when he said Alabama would be hit hard by Dorian. The National Weather Service posted its own update saying the impacts of this storm would not touch Alabama. The storm system is just too far to the east. Wyatt?
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting. Thanks, Mark. Vice President Mike Pence tells the leaders of Ireland the United States supports the United Kingdom's decision to leave the European Union.
We urge Ireland and the European Union as well to negotiate in good faith with Prime Minister Johnson and work to reach an agreement that respects the United Kingdom's sovereignty and minimizes disruption to commerce.
The remarks came as Pence visits Ireland for the first time as vice president. He held a news conference with Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar following a lunch meeting. The vice president visited Ireland after his trip to Warsaw, Poland. Pence went in President Trump's place as the White House is monitoring Hurricane Dorian. Philip Crowther with the Associated Press has more for us on the trip from Warsaw.
Vice President Mike Pence stepped into this trip to Poland at the very last moment, with President Trump deciding to stay home to monitor Hurricane Dorian. And Mike Pence really walked into one of the best bilateral relationships the United States currently has under the Trump administration, though the Polish President Andrzej Duda did bristle at the idea first floated by President Trump that Russia might be allowed back into the group of 7 nations, the G7, thereby turning it back into a G8. Duda saying that there should not be any, quote, business as usual with Russia right now. Duda and Pence also here in Warsaw did confirm again that 1,000 extra US troops will be moved to Poland, adding to the 4,500 already here. We did not, though, get the details as to when exactly those troops will be arriving and where exactly they will be based. That was on Monday. On Sunday, the Vice President was here for the commemorations for the 80th anniversary anniversary of the outbreak of World War II. During his speech here in central Warsaw, the Vice President paid tribute to the Polish nation for overcoming Nazism, German occupation, thereafter communism, and saying that it was in large part due to their faith. Poland is a country with a very large majority of Catholics. So that was during the commemorations, and earlier in the day, the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier with a very solemn moment asking Poland for forgiveness. The war lasted 6 years and 6 million people died here in Poland alone.
Our thanks to Philip Crowther from the Associated Press. At least 16 people are dead following a suicide bombing by the Taliban in Afghanistan. The strike also wounded nearly 120 others. It came just hours after a U.S. envoy said he and the militant group had reached a deal in principle to end America's longest war. The Taliban is defending the bombing, saying it wants to show it is entering the peace talks from a position of strength.
From the very beginning till now, I have never tendered a resignation to the Central People's Government. I have not even contemplated to discuss a resignation.
Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam refutes a report saying she had considered resigning from her job, saying to do so would be the easy way out. The former British territory has been roiled by several months of pro-democracy protests. On the day before his departure for Africa, Pope Francis says he's looking forward to meeting the people of Mauritius.
Cari fratelli e sorelle di Mauritius.
In a video message released today, the Holy Father praises the island nation for its diversity of religious and ethnic groups and says he will bring with him the gospel and its message of love. The Holy Father also will visit Mozambique and Madagascar. Pope Francis says he will create 13 new cardinals next month.
Il prossimo 5 ottobre terrò un consistorio.
The Holy Father made the surprise announcement Sunday after he recited the Angelus prayer from a window overlooking St. Peter's Square. The new cardinals come from North America, Central America, Africa, Europe, and Asia. The formal ceremony to give the churchman a red hat will be held on October 5th at the Vatican. It will take place on the eve of a meeting known as a synod on the Amazon. Hannah Brockhaus, senior Rome correspondent for Catholic News Agency, joins us now. Hannah, what can you tell us about some of the new cardinals to be elevated?
Well, Wyatt, Pope Francis chose 13 new cardinals. 10 of them are eligible to vote in a future conclave. And among those that he chose are some from developing countries such as the Congo, Guatemala, and Indonesia. And 2 are also from, like I said, Indonesia and Morocco, which are primarily Muslim countries. One interesting choice is the Jesuit priest Father Michael Czerny, who is the undersecretary for the Migrants and Refugees section of the Vatican's Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development. His career has really focused on social justice, migrants, human rights, and these really align with a lot of the priorities of Pope Francis's pontificate. Another choice who aligns with the Pope's priorities would be Cardinal-elect Jean-Claude Hollerich of Luxembourg, who is the president of the Catholic Bishops' Conference in the European Union. He has also spoken out about fear of migrants in Europe, which has been one of the topics of Pope Francis.
And when you think about these priorities, when the Holy Father made the announcement Sunday, he said the group expresses the missionary vocation of the Church. So how will this selection impact the future then of the Church?
Well, they will certainly most likely have an impact on future conclaves that are to elect a future pope. But in addition to that, I think they demonstrate the Pope's choice of the peripheries, as he expressed it, the missionary value of the Church.
And this will be the Holy Father's 6th consistory. Have you noticed any trends when it comes to his pick of new cardinals?
There are a few. One of these is his choice of bishops from the peripheries of the Church and of the world. Another is his choice of a bishop from one of the places he visited in the past year. This time he's chosen Archbishop Cristobal Romero from Rabat, Morocco. Another trend is that the Pope will choose people in positions that traditionally have a cardinal in those positions, But it isn't automatic for him like it has been in the past. And when he does choose someone, it shows his trust in that person.
It's very interesting to think about how he chooses those Cardinals and, of course, to get an update on all of that. Hannah Brockhaus, Senior Rome Correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Pope Francis was 7 minutes late to his noon Angelus prayer with the faithful on Sunday. He had a good excuse.
Loro e dopo 25 minuti di lavoro sono riuscito a farlo andare.
The Holy Father says he was stuck in an elevator at the Vatican for 25 minutes and had to be saved by firefighters. He asked the pilgrims to give the rescuers a round of applause. Coming up, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin announces whether he is running for governor. And following another deadly shooting in Texas, Democrats running for president renew their calls for gun control. West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin says he will not run for governor. The Democrat put an end to speculation he tried to return to his old job, saying he believes his role in the Senate allows him to better position the state for success. Manchin has voted for several pro-life proposals. Walmart says it will discontinue the sale of handgun ammunition. The announcement comes just days after a mass shooting claimed 7 lives in Odessa, Texas, and follows 2 other back-to-back shootings last month, one of them at a Walmart store. The company also urges the White House and congressional leaders to strengthen background checks. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reports. Jason?
Wyatt, Congress hasn't been able to strike a deal on gun reform. Think about the calls after Columbine, after Newtown, and after Parkland. New calls again today after this latest tragedy in Texas.
Prayers rise up in Texas while families of the 7 dead mourn.
You know, it's the worst thing we can do is for good men to do nothing. And it's not an issue about we want to take everyone's guns. I have a gun. I have it for my home to protect my family.
Thank you. Democrats running for president blame Republicans for not dealing with the issue.
To me, a very middle-of-the-road, rather conservative compromise would be to do background checks and red flag laws and perhaps a milder version of an assault weapons ban. That's the compromise, because that's the middle of what the American people want.
President Donald Trump says he's working to stop mass shootings.
We're looking at a lot of different bills, ideas, concepts.
Love your kids, hold your kids.
After Parkland in 2018, he backed expanded background checks. However, again, he's doubting if they'd stop recent shootings.
For the most part, as strong as you make your background checks, they would not have stopped any of it.
Today, Texas Republican Ted Cruz pitched his background check proposal.
The problem, rather, is that too many felonies are not included in the background check system. And when I have repeatedly introduced legislation to fix that problem, the Democrats have filibustered that legislation.
The U.S. bishops have put out 9 statements in response to shootings this year alone. The head of the U.S. bishops, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, again urges people of goodwill, starting with our Catholic leaders and faithful, to work tirelessly to root out the causes of such crimes. Church teaching allows for self-defense, although in 2006, the Vatican's Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace wrote, limiting the purchase of such arms would certainly not infringe on the rights of anyone.
Good Catholics can disagree on this issue of gun reform. It's not a black and white issue like abortion. The Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says he would be willing to bring forward a gun reform bill if the president would sign it. The former Vice President Joe Biden, the Democratic frontrunner, predicts that some Republicans will lose if they fail to pass gun reform. Wyatt?
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi reporting. Thanks, Jason. And here with her analysis is Star Parker, president and founder of CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, a public policy institute based here in Washington. Star, welcome back. We hear a lot about the need for gun control. How do we protect the Second Amendment and at the same time stop the mass shootings that we've seen?
Well, the first thing we do is we take a deep breath and we take the emotion out of it as much as we can. People are hurting. These crimes affect all of us because when you think about our Second Amendment protections and then you have people that are disconnected that keep doing this type of terror against their neighbors is alarming. But the first thing we want to do is not become reactionary and not just throw situational ethics legislation together. So to your question, what do we do? How do we protect the second, which is there to protect the first? So we make sure that we understand the Constitution and why we have that protection there in the first place. All data shows that the majority of gun owners in our country own to protect themselves. This is a protection of ourselves. It's not about hunting, it's not about assault, it's about protection, not just from those that might violate us, but also from our government. This is one of the reasons that that's there. So we want to make sure that that is understood in our society. But now we also have to look at what has happened that we have so many of these incidents. Data is showing us that family and faith play a very, very key role in helping people self-govern. What we're looking at in most of these cases, in fact, of all of these cases, are disconnected young men who do not have a sense of family or belonging. And these attacks against the church should be in this discussion to say maybe there is a real role for God and God's people. When you don't believe in God and eternity, it's very easy to get lost and to start doing damage to your neighbor.
What do you think people as faith, people in churches can do about this? Because we have so many people who are not going to church anymore, who don't want to participate in that. How do we encourage people to do that, not only participate in church, but in our communities?
Well, that's the number one area that we should be concerned about as the body of Christ, as the church, is are we evangelizing our neighbors? Are we letting people know about the Lord? Are we letting them know that they're not alone in their lives? Are we inviting them to church? Most people go to church because they're invited. And we've lost that sense that we can actually influence our neighbor, that we can be there in their time of need and their comfort. To live in a community to where everybody drives in their garage and then there's just no interaction between each other, fuels some of this damage that we have. So we have to have that discussion. It's not just about gun law and gun control. That's going to be a violent discussion in our society because we have over 300 million guns in our society. And to try to confiscate them would be a real struggle. But we can address faith and we can address the breakdown in family.
Well, going back to that point, though, about background checks and gun control, though, because we're talking so much about this at a federal level, do you think it's better addressed perhaps at a state level? Because we seem to only be talking about one potential solution here.
Well, it is to be discussed in the states and even more local in the communities where everybody is watching each other. You see something, say something approach that we now hear often as a slogan since 9/11. But anywhere that you do it, whether it's state or local, it cannot violate the Constitution. So what we have to do on a local level is say, are we being community? Are we being neighborly? What kind of laws do we have in place that help us interact? One of the challenges that we have now is this big dependency on government that gets people isolated. They're not connected to community and family anymore because they can live off of Uncle Sam. So that is another part of it that we must talk about. People are talking about mental, but let's think about it. Even in mental depression, when you have a real deep relationship with God and you understand eternity, we can solve some of these problems. So I think the first order of business on a local level is appreciation of the role of religion in one's personal lives.
So many important issues here that we could potentially talk about even more if we had time, Star, but no doubt that this national debate on the issue will be brought up, of course, as we approach the 2020 elections. Star Parker, president and founder of the Center for Urban Renewal and Education, thanks so much for coming in today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
At least 34 people are dead after a boat packed with scuba divers caught fire in Southern California. The dive boat became engulfed in flames just before dawn yesterday. Passengers were sleeping below the deck when the blaze started. 5 crew members swam for safety and called for help. Rescue crews called off a search mission today. One police official says, quote, "You couldn't ask for a worse situation." Up next, a pro-life group accuses a social media giant of censorship. And the church recognizes a healing from a Catholic shrine in Ireland. A Catholic school in Tennessee has removed the Harry Potter books from its library. The pastor in Nashville says, quote, "The curses and spells used in the books are actual curses and spells." The commercially successful books were written by J.K. Rowling and led to a profitable movie franchise. Facebook over the weekend sought to restrict access to pages run by pro-life group Live Action and its president, Lila Rose. The social media giant labeled the group's claim abortion is never medically necessary as false and inaccurate. Rose says it's clear evidence Facebook is guilty of censorship and bias. Catholic author and cultural critic Mary Eberstadt says the breakdown of the family is just one of many reasons why so many Americans are feeling lost, asking themselves the question, who am I? Eberstadt explores the topic in her new book, Primal Screams, How the Sexual Revolution Created Identity Politics. She explains why we are divided as a society and how the rejection of important values is making it worse. Mary joins me now in studio. Mary, welcome. Explain to your audience what exactly identity politics is and why you think that's the result of the sexual revolution.
Well, you know, Wyatt, some people say that identity politics is how politics has always been. We find groups that we identify with, whose interests we share. But this is not true in the case of identity politics. Scholars agree that this way of doing politics started about 1977. It has mushroomed ever since. Now we have all kinds of identity groups. We have white nationalists. We have groups based on ethnicity, groups based on gender. And these groups, despite their political differences, share two things in common. One is a sense of grievance, and the other is a sense that anyone who's not with us is against us. And we see this drama play out in national politics. We see it on campuses. So identity politics is not politics as usual. It's something new. And why do I say it's connected to the sexual revolution? Well, one reason is the timeline. Here we have a way of doing politics that starts in the late 1970s as the first generation to come of age after the sexual revolution is really hitting the scene. And why does the revolution play such an important role? Because if you look at what it did to human community and to the human family, we have had abortion, fatherlessness, cohabitation, family breakup on a scale that has never been seen before. And combined with that, we have smaller families and more distant families. So the argument of the book is that the family used to be the primary way of answering that question, who am I? And after the sexual revolution, a lot of people don't have access to that answer anymore.
So just follow up on that. In the book, you say maybe today people are claiming to be victims because they and their societies are victims. What do you mean by that?
Well, this is what's new about the argument. It's the idea that there is an authenticity to all of the grievance out there. But the object of the grievance has been misidentified. The problem for people is not something abstract like the patriarchy, say, or the gender binary. No, the problem is that we are social animals and we are living more disconnected from our families than any others would dare to live. And there's evidence of harm, too. We have falling life expectancy. We have a rise in psychiatric problems among teenagers, especially, and younger people. And so in the book, I trace these to what I think is their root, which is the disconnectedness that was caused by the sexual revolution.
So what can we as Catholics do to help solve this problem?
Well, the first thing we need to do is understand that the church called a pretty big thing right here. You know, the Catholic Church has gotten a bad rap for standing up for the family. But when we see the kind of fallout that we're seeing on a national scale, and I don't think anybody in this country would say that America's better off now than it was 50 years ago, when we see this kind of fallout, we should go back to those teachings of the church about the family and about subsidiarity and the importance of community, and understand that these aren't just big words. These are ways to human flourishing, and the Catholic Church should get some credit for that.
Very good. Family is the building block of society, as they say. Mary Eberstadt, author of Primal Screams, How the Sexual Revolution Created Identity Politics. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Wyatt.
Church officials have recognized the first healing at the Knock Shrine in Ireland. Our EWTN team from Ireland was there for the announcement. Bishop Francis Duffy read a letter from the woman cured of multiple sclerosis in 1989.
Marion wrote, "This gift was not for me alone, but to the people of the world, to let them know that God was there, and that all people had to do was ask, and they would receive."
Marion Campbell was paralyzed, nearly blind, and barely able to talk when she visited the shrine in 1989. Officials say there is no medical explanation for her recovery. The shrine in Knock, Ireland, dates from 1879. Finally tonight, thousands of pilgrims gathered in Peru's capital late last week to honor the nation's patron saint. The procession was for Saint Rose of Lima. The faithful also congregated at the site where she was believed to have been born. It's now a convent. They drop letters into a well at the feet of her statue in the hope that their wishes will be granted. Saint Rose of Lima was canonized in 1671. And of course, Saint Rose of Lima is also known for her piety and chastity. And with that, we conclude our newscast for tonight. We thank you for watching. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless.